Eagles insider and national NFL columnist John McMullen. FanRag Sports NFL is where you can catch all of his NFL news and notes. Plus, follow him on Twitter at JF McMullen. He joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. John, another busy NFL day. The offseason ramping up already here as we've seen some other big names hitting the unemployment line.
Yeah, big day for the New York Giants, but expected. Obviously, they had to move on from Victor Cruz, who saves them about $7.5 million, but also Rashad Jennings, who was obviously their best running back. And that kind of perks up your ears a little bit at least, because if you project the potential landing spots for Adrian Peterson, I think the Giants would now have to be at the top of that list.
Wow, interesting. So the domino effect there is we move on from Rashad Jennings. We clear out space with a very expensive, unfortunately injured wideout Victor Cruz, and then maybe a big splash right there. Victor Cruz, do you see the Giants interested in bringing him back, or do you think that relationship is over?
I think it's over. The Giants have a ton of respect for him. It's very rare. In fact, both players. It's very rare when you release players, you quote them when you announce the release, because there's usually some bitterness involved. But in this case, the Giants quoted both of the players in their own press release when announcing the move. So it kind of shows you the respect they had for him. And people around the league have a ton of respect for Victor Cruz, just coming back from that injury, which was suffered at Lincoln Financial Field, the torn patellar tendon. It was amazing he got back on the field to begin with, but he's just not physically capable of doing it anywhere at a level he was before, and that's unfortunate because he was a heck of a receiver. So anytime you see a high-profile name, the second question I assume you're going to ask, would the Eagles have some interest? Absolutely not. He's got nothing left, and that's a shame.
Yes,
that was exactly what we were going to ask.
That is the follow-up, just to appease everybody out there, because, and we'll talk about it because we talked about it Friday, but there's more, conversation around the Eagles. It seems that any wideout, they tried to go on the cheap last year. They brought in Ruben Randall. They brought in Chris Givens. So
how'd that work out?
You seem like you're putting the line, the red line through going that route again, the cheap route with the guy who they're just hoping gives you his best season that he had, that he's had in 3 years.
Yeah, and it's just the physical aspect of it. He's just not capable of doing it at the level he was at. And I understand, because he was a star receiver in this league. He was a Pro Bowl player, and he was tremendous before that injury, but it's not the same guy. And the Giants know that. The Eagles know it. Everybody in the NFL knows it. So you see those stories in every city when a big name comes on. Is he a fit for insert team?
Sure.
And basically for 32 teams, probably not.
So you don't see Cruz in the league next year?
Well, he wants to play. I'm not saying he can't be on a roster somewhere because people have such respect for him, but I don't think he's going to be a serious contributor. I don't think he was a serious contributor for the Giants. He caught 39 balls, but no one was scared of him. As the third receiver on the team, people would always talk about how talented the Giants receiving corps was. And certainly at the top it is with OBJ. And it kind of tells you, with all the respect and all the double coverage that Beckham receives, he still couldn't do anything against single coverage because, again, the explosion is not there. And that history, the history of that injury with any player is not good. And usually you never get back to the field and play football again. The fact that he was able to do it, as I said, he deserves a ton of credit for it, but there's just physically he's not the same guy.
What about Jennings? I guess similar question. I mean, with the Eagles, they need running back. Is he a guy? He's kind of a plotter, though. He's not really, a dynamic player, which is why the Giants are moving on from him.
No, he's solid, though. Yeah, he's capable. He's an NFL-level player.
Is he better than Ryan Matthews?
He's 32, and you know how the Eagles feel about guys 30 or over.
Yeah, I don't think he's necessarily a fit because of that reason. He certainly is not going to be on the top of your list, but he's a guy who is still a capable NFL player that if you needed to lean on, he could give you some help and do some things. But certainly you want to get younger at that position. And as far as the Eagles moving forward, they would prefer to see what somebody like Wendell Smallwood could do before even entertaining going down that route. You always want to go younger. You want to go cheaper. That's just the nature of the NFL. But just Jennings as a player, I think there's a little more gas left in the tank than Cruz.
Hey, John, the Eagles have a lot of things, still on their to-do list here. Connor Barwin, some reports about Michael Kendricks, which we talked about Friday. Ryan Matthews' name that you brought up. You got that at the top of the list. But what about the possibility of re-signing Benny Logan? Where do you think that's on their to-do list?
Well, I think it's high, but it's going to be difficult because he's going to have so much interest in other cities around the league if he gets to free agency, and his agent knows that, sort of taking the pulse. And Benny didn't have his best season last year, but he's still a relatively young player, and that's the kind of guy, if he hits free agency, he's going to get overpaid. So they know that. And if you think about all the money the Eagles already have tied up at that position because of Fletcher Cox, it's tough to pay two defensive tackles really, really top-tier money. So while the Eagles would certainly love to have him back at a little bit of a hometown discount, I don't think that's going to be possible. And I think it's likely that Benny Logan's probably going to move on.
They have a lot of money tied up on that defensive line. You make a good point about whether or not they can even afford to bring him back. I think I read something that the Patriots had 7 players on their roster making over $5 million, and the Eagles have like 17 players of guys. And the Patriots are what, John? $62 million under the cap. And we always kind of criticize the Eagles for never spending and, always having money left under the cap. And it's a sign that that is, being cheap sometimes is a strength.
Yeah, it's not necessarily being cheap either. It's really more, and I think you're right. I think people don't understand. There's sort of a science to building rosters in this league, and it's, if you want to use the Patriots as an example, it's not that they think Jamie Collins can't play, a player like that. They knew he was coming up. He was going to be a free agent. They knew if he got to the open market, he was going to get overpaid. And all of a sudden, they trade him for that reason, because while they think he's a good player, they don't want to pay him $13 million. He's now the highest paid a linebacker in football. He gets more money than Luke Kuechly. So they were right, and they're right by moving on. It's not saying that you don't like him or you don't think he can play. It's just as you relate it to how you build your roster, do you want to spend that much money for that particular player? And they tend to err on the other side of the fence, and everybody points to the Patriots, as they rightfully should, as the real gold standard in this league. And yeah, I mean, it's tough when you don't have that success to back it up. You can imagine if the Eagles just say, well, we don't want to pay that guy. Well, you don't have the 5 Super Bowl rings, and everyone's going to climb to the soapbox and say you're cheap and you don't want to keep good players. whereas the Patriots get the benefit of the doubt, so it's a lot easier for them to make those kinds of moves. And it's sort of a catch-22.
John, it's no secret the Eagles need help at wide receiver, but do you think they need to make a huge splash in free agency? What about a guy like Kenny Britt? Are you okay with Kenny Britt?
No, I would be very careful. I would be very wary of trying to overpay a free agent, even if it's Alshon Jeffrey, because of some of the off the field issues. In his case, a suspension we've seen with Lane Johnson if you get to strike two, and things like that. I really think the Eagles have to go to slow and steady route. They have to build through the draft, and it has to be homegrown. And unfortunately, they've missed. And I understand. We talk about it all the time. They missed with a first-round pick. They missed with a third-round pick. And that hurts, and it's difficult. And you say, what's different now? Well, they have a different personnel guy. And let's see what Joe Douglas can do. I would rather build from the draft and sort of get these homegrown guys who can grow with Carson Wentz. Now, that's not obviously going to be a popular thing amongst the fan base who always want the big name. And that's why I just mentioned, I guarantee you 80% of this fan base is saying, go sign Victor Cruz. And no offense to them, but that would be a colossally dumb move. So you got to be very careful with named players and free agency. We've seen it blow up on the Eagles in the past. And when you talk about guys like Kenny Britt or even Kenny Stills, I just don't think that's the way to build long-term success.
Well, how about this, John, then? Because you say Eagles fans get enamored with the names that they know, would you try to then trade up to target a guy that a lot of people watched in the national championship game, Mike Williams from Clemson?
Well, I don't know if you're going to have to, number one. It's still very early in the process, and guys are going to keep moving up and moving down the board. And at this point, I've seen him going anywhere from top 10. I've seen other mock drafts having them down in the 20s. So you might not have to. And they're going to sit there at 14 or 15, depending on how the coin toss goes in Indianapolis. And if they stay put, they're going to get a good player. It might be a wide receiver. It might be a cornerback. But they're going to be able to fill a position of need. And you never say never to trading up if you really like a guy, and if you have to go up and get him. But I think more likely would be trading down to accumulate other picks and getting more bodies for the roster, not less.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I kind of agree that where they are right now, that they didn't have a second-round pick last year. I think trading down for this team might be something that is more appealing with the depth at wide out and corner in this particular draft.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And as we said, the depth on this team is an issue. So if anything, as I said, they need more bodies, not less. And again, it's not a popular way of doing things. People like moving up. People like the splash moves, but it's not always necessarily the best move.
Is there a particular guy in free agency that you would like to see them target?
I mean, if they're going at wide receiver, I would, and obviously it would be cornerback. The one guy who I think is going to break the bank and just was lights out and late in the season and in the playoffs was A.J. Boye, the cornerback from Houston. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when you're early in the process, March 9th, and we'll have coming up the franchise tags, I don't think he's ever going to hit the market. But if there's one guy I would want, because of his age, because of what he was able to do, I think he's a true lockdown corner. I think he would be the best fit for this team, but I don't even think he's going to get to the open market.
John, does Kendricks have value around the league?
Yeah, I think he's so athletic. He's got value. Now, it depends what you define as value. I think they'll be able to trade him. They're not going to get a ton for him because he just didn't play that much. And when you don't have – when you're coming off a season where you barely played, it essentially turns into a salary dump because he makes so much money. But I do think they'll be able to trade him if that's the way they want to go. And much like I think I mentioned that on last week, I don't know if that's necessarily the right thing to do. I think that could be another Eric Rowe type mistake by Jim Schwartz. I think they've sort of rushed to judgment on Michael Kendricks, and I think athletically he's a fit for this defense. I doubt Nigel Bradham's going to have another year like he had this year. And all of a sudden you have no depth at the linebacker position. I'd be very, very cautious with that.
A couple talking with John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, at JF McMullen on Twitter. You can check out his NFL columns over at FanRag Sports NFL. John, just, interesting because the Patriots always seem to pull the right strings. What do you think they do with LeGarrette Blount?
I don't think they need him. Let's put it that way. In fact, I know. I mean, the Patriots are sort of just able, especially at running back, it seems, over the years, just plug people in. LeGarrette Blount's a perfect example of that. They had him. They let him go to Pittsburgh, and when Pittsburgh got tired of him, they just brought him back and put him right back in to the system, and he performed like he did in the past. So I don't think it's important for them. And if you think about where they are, they have so much as far as it just seems like every single day you see another crazy rumor about Jimmy Garoppolo and what teams are willing to give up in return for him. So I think they're going to get a windfall from him, and they're just going to be in a good position to address a number of positions, and running back could be one of them. Obviously, after the fumble in the Super Bowl, as is Bill Belichick's history, he does not like people who fumble and run away from Blount. So I don't think they're sitting there and saying, we need LeGarrette Blount, that's for sure.
Hey, John, you wrote about the direction that the Redskins are heading over at FanRag Sports NFL. They got a lot of very interesting decisions. You got the Cousins decision, you got D-Jack, you got Garcon, among others. And I guess today was announced that Gruden will, in fact, call the plays. So his third year in now, he's going to take over the play calling. Where do you see the direction of the Redskins this offseason?
Well, it's not good, mainly because of the front office. And as usual, dysfunction seems like a way of life in Washington, D.C., and it's been that way for the Redskins as well ever since Daniel Snyder's been there. And then, Bruce Allen, who's the team president, that doesn't allow the GM to speak at the Senior Bowl. He's not going to allow him to speak at the scouting combine. You have a head coach who lost both of his coordinators. As you mentioned, he's going to take over the play calling. I never advocate that for any head coach. I tell you guys that all the time. I think it's a mistake. So I don't like the way things are going at the top for the Redskins, and it seems like Daniel Snyder always creates this atmosphere where people are worried, and then you have fingers pointing. You have Bruce Allen pointing fingers at Scott McClugan, and he'll point fingers at Jay Gruden, and everyone is not on the same page. So I just don't like how the Redskins do business in general.
All right, a lot of NFC East stuff throughout the week, and NFL news and notes, of course, daily here on the Sports Bash with John. Follow him at JF McMullen on Twitter. Thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, guys.